Have you ever felt disrespected in a situation where there were no insults, no raised voices, and no obvious offense, yet something in the air, whether it was a look, a pause, or a subtle shift in tone, made you feel like something was off, even though you couldn't clearly explain why? And what makes this even more unsettling is the fact that when you try to put it into words, it feels like you might sound paranoid or overly sensitive, which is exactly how this kind of dynamic manages to stay hidden while quietly affecting how you see yourself. This is the nature of silent disrespect, because it does not scream loudly or openly challenge you, but instead operates through subtle signals that slip into your awareness and begin to influence your thoughts in ways that make you question your own perception. You might find yourself asking questions like whether you are overthinking the situation, whether the other person actually meant something by their behavior, or whether the issue lies within you rather than in what just happened. However, the reality is that you are not imagining things, because what you are experiencing is your mind picking up on signals that most people have been conditioned to overlook or dismiss without deeper reflection. What you are about to understand is what is really happening beneath the surface of these interactions. Because once you recognize the patterns behind silent disrespect, it becomes impossible to ignore them. And more importantly, it becomes impossible to tolerate them in the same passive way. Silent disrespect functions as a form of subtle dominance, where individuals test your boundaries without exposing themselves to the risk of direct confrontation or accountability. If someone openly disrespects you, the situation becomes clear and immediate, allowing you to respond, defend yourself, and re-establish your position without ambiguity. But when disrespect is silent, it traps you in uncertainty, because it exists in a gray area where intentions can be denied and interpretations can be questioned. This ambiguity creates a psychological loop where you hesitate to react, and that hesitation becomes the very signal that others use to determine how far they can go. Small actions like delayed responses, dismissive glances, or subtle interruptions delivered with a smile are not always random occurrences, because they often function as tests designed to measure your tolerance. The deeper truth is that people do not base their respect on what you say alone, but on what you consistently allow in your interactions with them. Every time you overlook or ignore subtle signs of disrespect, you are unintentionally teaching others the standards they can apply when dealing with you. Most individuals are unaware that they are reinforcing this dynamic because they choose to laugh things off, remain silent, or adopt a relaxed attitude in an attempt to avoid conflict. Internally, however, these moments accumulate into feelings of frustration, confusion, and eventually resentment, which can alter the way you carry yourself over time. Human beings are naturally wired to interpret social hierarchies and status cues, and this process occurs on an instinctive level, rather than through conscious reasoning. People constantly observe who speaks with certainty, who gets interrupted, who is acknowledged, and who is overlooked, and these observations form patterns that define how each individual is perceived. Once a pattern is established, it tends to solidify into an identity within that social context, making it increasingly difficult to change without deliberate action. Silent disrespect becomes persistent, not because it is inherently powerful, but because it is rarely challenged in a direct or effective way. It often begins with very small actions that seem insignificant in isolation, such as a lack of proper acknowledgement, a cold response, or a noticeable difference in how someone treats you compared to how they treat others. At first, these moments appear random or harmless, but as they repeat, they create a pattern that your mind tries to interpret and resolve. Your brain seeks consistency, and when it encounters inconsistency, it attempts to explain it in a way that reduces discomfort, often by rationalizing the other person's behavior. This is where you might start attributing their actions to external factors like tiredness or personality, or even begin to question whether you are the source of the issue. The moment you internalize these explanations, your standards begin to lower, and this shift in your internal framework allows the behavior to continue and intensify. Behavior naturally expands in environments where there is no resistance, which means that unchallenged actions tend to become more frequent and more pronounced over time. An important aspect to understand is that silent disrespect is not always a conscious or malicious strategy. as people often test boundaries instinctively, without deliberate intent. Much like children who explore limits to understand what is acceptable, adults engage in similar behavior, but express it through more subtle and socially refined actions. Instead of obvious displays of defiance, they rely on micro-behaviors such as slight changes in tone, controlled indifference, or minimal engagement. If these behaviors are not addressed early, they gradually escalate until you find yourself being treated as less important, less valued, or less respected, without a clear moment when the shift occurred. Consider a situation where you are part of a group conversation and you share an idea that receives no response, only for someone else to repeat the same idea moments later and receive attention, agreement, and engagement from the group. This scenario illustrates silent disrespect, not necessarily because others intentionally ignored you, but because your presence did not carry enough perceived weight in that moment. Respect is closely tied to the concept of perceived value, which is shaped by observable behavior rather than internal qualities or intentions. You may possess intelligence, kindness, and capability, but if your behavior communicates uncertainty or hesitation, others will respond to those signals rather than your underlying attributes. People often rely on silent disrespect instead of direct confrontation because it allows them to maintain control without exposing themselves to risk or accountability. If confronted, they can easily deny any negative intent, shifting the focus onto your reaction and framing you as overly sensitive or mistaken. This dynamic places you in a defensive position while allowing them to retain psychological control over the interaction. Reacting emotionally within this framework tends to reinforce the dynamic, as it aligns with the position they have implicitly created for you. The key to breaking this pattern lies in awareness, because recognizing silent disrespect prevents you from internalizing it and enables you to respond with intention rather than emotion. When your response changes, the dynamic shifts, not through increased volume or aggression, but through subtle adjustments in how you carry yourself. Instead of chasing attention, you begin to command it by speaking with clarity and allowing silence to reinforce your presence. Silence, when used intentionally, becomes a powerful tool that can shift the balance of an interaction without the need for confrontation. For example, when someone interrupts you, continuing to speak calmly without yielding the floor sends a clear signal that you do not accommodate subtle pressure. Similarly, when faced with dismissive behavior, responding with composed indifference rather than seeking validation demonstrates self-respect and reduces the incentive for others to continue the behavior. Attention functions as a form of currency in social interactions, and the way you allocate or withdraw it influences the balance of power. Individuals who consistently tolerate silent disrespect often share a tendency to seek approval and avoid conflict, prioritizing harmony even when it comes at their own expense. Paradoxically, the stronger the desire to be liked, the more likely it is that respect will diminish, because respect is built on the presence of clear boundaries. Boundaries naturally introduce a degree of friction, and without that friction, there is little incentive for others to adjust their behavior. Clarity in communication, response, and tolerance levels reduces the likelihood of being tested, while ambiguity invites continued pressure. Nonverbal communication plays a significant role in silent disrespect, as elements like eye contact, posture, timing, and micro-expressions convey information that often carries more weight than spoken words. Avoiding eye contact can signal insecurity, hesitation in speech can suggest doubt, and closed or collapsed posture can indicate submission, all of which are interpreted instinctively by others. Achieving alignment between your words, tone, and body language creates a consistent signal of confidence that is difficult to challenge. It is important to recognize that eliminating silent disrespect entirely is not a realistic goal, as some individuals will continue to test boundaries or project their own insecurities. The focus should instead be on controlling your response, because your response ultimately determines how the interaction evolves. By refusing to remain passive and choosing to respond with awareness and intention, you shift the dynamic in a way that influences how others perceive and treat you. Silent disrespect is less about the actions of others and more about the space you create through your standards, boundaries, and presence. People respond to consistent signals, and when those signals change, their behavior adjusts accordingly. The next time you experience that subtle sense of discomfort, it is important to observe it rather than dismiss or rationalize it, and to respond in a way that reflects intention rather than emotion. Awareness becomes a powerful tool in navigating interactions where disrespect is not openly expressed, allowing you to maintain control without unnecessary conflict. Over time, this shift in awareness and response leads to a change in how you are perceived, reducing instances of being overlooked, dismissed, or tested. Respect is not something that is passively received, but something that is actively built through consistent actions and decisions. Each interaction contributes to the overall perception others have of you, making it essential to remain conscious of what you allow and what you reinforce. Reflecting on past situations where you remained silent or avoided tension can provide insight into patterns that may need to change. Ultimately, the question is not why others engage in silent disrespect, but what behaviors and allowances make them believe it is acceptable. Answering that question with honesty creates the foundation for change, and once that foundation is established, the way others treat you begins to shift naturally. If this perspective has brought clarity to your experiences, the next step is to apply this awareness consistently, observing how small adjustments in behavior influence the reactions of others over time. As these changes take effect, you will notice a gradual transformation in how you are treated, reinforcing the principle that respect is shaped by what you signal rather than what you say.